Okay. So this is the first, what I believe will be the first of 2 classes of a review for the mimer. I do not believe we'll be able to finish it all today, but the review of the mimer Vekibeil HaYehudim of the previous Rebbe. It's the first mimer in the book Defiance and Devotion, which some people have as a book, some people have it online, whatever it is. You don't need the book today because you have the handout, which is the review. So remember, this was said by the previous Rebbe in 1927 in Moscow. Really, on a physical level, this mimer resulted in his being arrested and sentenced to the opposite of life, which was then commuted to exile for, I think it was supposed to be 10 years, which was commuted to 10 days. And he was actually told that he had to leave Russia and went to Riga, Latvia after this. But this was the mimer that really he put his life on the line for, is to give this message over to the Yidden who were living in Moscow in 1927. So he knew that there were informers at this Farbrengen, and he went ahead with the Farbrengen anyway. Now, this is the excerpt from the letter of the previous Rebbe 9 years later, where he says a little bit about this mimer. It says, on Purim Katan, I'm going to read this. This is a quote that the book starts with. I thought it was worth repeating. This is to set the mindset, right? On Purim Katan in 1927, which fell on Wednesday, I was in Moscow. The chassidim and the tmimim, may we live and be well, organized the Farbrengen to be held in the Lubavitcher Rebbe. We were there. Actually, when my husband and I went to Moscow, we were there. It's in the same location as the new shul. The new shul's in front of it, a huge building, 7-story building, I think. And there's a little tiny shul behind it, which is the original Lubavitcher shul in Moscow. That same morning, I was informed that investigations were being made concerning me at my lodgings in the Serbirsky Hotel. A secret agent was already counting my steps. Early in the evening, I received news from Leningrad that, may we never know such news, a person close to me had been arrested. In fact, amongst chassidim, fears were being expressed concerning me. Nevertheless, I did not want to cancel the Farbrengen. The Farbrengen was held at the appointed hour. I delivered the mimer, which began with the words Vekibeil HaYehudim as Asher Hechelu, which is the pasuk that our mimer is based on. The concept of self-sacrifice for the sake of Torah and its mitzvos is mentioned there several times. So he was really practicing what he preached. I placed particular emphasis on those passages, ignoring the fact that the very walls had ears. Later in the course of the Farbrengen, I repeated those words with an emphasis intended to arouse the hearts of my listeners to action in keeping with the needs of those days. And he did arouse his listeners to action, and we know the rest is history. I mean, Baruch Hashem, it's quite incredible, what the Friedrich accomplished at the risk of his life. Okay, so ready for the beginning of the review? Lots of color-coded stuff here so that we can follow along. So the questions and their answers are in the same color. Okay, section 1. The pasuk and the Jews accepted what they had already begun, which is Vekibeil HaYehudim Asher Hechelu L'asais, which is from Megillas Esther. This is said on Purim Katan, so it usually a mimer, it has some kind of connection to something going on. From Megillas Esther, and the pasuk the Jews affirmed and accepted later on in Megillas Esther refer to the idea that at the time of Purim, the Jews re-accepted the Torah that they had already accepted and begun at the giving of the Torah, right? That's, the bold of the words to show how the words in the original mimer and the original pasuk are hinting to a different pasuk, which talks about the Jews accepting and beginning to keep the Torah, and it's like an allusion. The pasuk in Esther is an allusion to that by using similar wording, and so the commentators say when the Megillas Esther says, and the Jews accepted what they already begun, it's referring to the giving of the Torah, and they sort of re-accepted it. What they had already accepted had begun at the giving of the giving of the Torah. Okay, that's just what the verse is. Our main question of our mimer is, this is hard to understand, that the giving of the Torah, the Jews were on a very high spiritual level and had seen many miracles and manifestations of Hashem. Sorry about that. Exile is a time when godliness is concealed. So how could a higher level acceptance of the Torah have happened during the times of Purim? That's our main question that this mimer is based on, right? So far, so good? Specifically, there's a little bit of elaboration in the mimer that previous Rebbe elaborates on this. Specifically, Purim was a time that they were trying to annihilate the Jews through striking at the children first. An additional example is brought from the times of Achaz, who also tried to stop the Jews from thriving by taking it out on the young children so that there would be no future of Torah, like Haman tried to do as well later on in history. Yeshayahu was the prophet at that time, prevented that from happening in the times of Achaz by ensuring that the children continued learning Torah, as did Mordechai in the times of Purim. And that's going to be revisited at the end of the mimer. It's going to be sort of reviewed, this idea. We, of course, in hindsight, can say that the previous Rebbe did the same thing for the Jews in Soviet Russia, that they also tried to strike at the children first, not allowing them to go to Jewish schools and wanting them to be indoctrinated with communism. And he put his life on the line to make sure that there were schools for children, I suppose, learning from Mordechai and Yeshayahu, right? I mean, like that, accomplishing the same thing. And we know that when he came to America, the first thing the previous Rebbe, one of the first things he did was open up yeshiva system, schools. Okay, so this is the first section. Any questions? Section 2. Question. This section has a question and an answer within it, like this, which elaborates on this idea of why would they strike at the children first, and why would it be so important to fortify the Yidden through the children first. Question. It says, out of the mouths of babes and sucklings you establish strength to silence the enemy and the avenger. That's in Tehillim. How could it be that the enemy is overcome through children? It's, we don't think about that. We think about large armies fighting each other. We don't think about wars being won with children. Enemies display hatred and fight openly and follow the conventions of war. Avengers hide their hatred, scheme about how to take revenge on those weaker than they, and follow no conventions. But out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, they silence both the enemy and the avenger. So the Rebbe is explaining what the difference is between them, between enemies and avengers. And the pasuk says that how could it be that babes and sucklings can silence the enemy and avenger? That doesn't seem to make any sense, because certainly in a physical war, children and nursing babies can't do anything to help the physical war. So why would the pasuk say that babes and sucklings are the ones who are going to silence the enemy and avenger? So the answer to that is, it says, not by might and not by power, but by my spirit, says Hashem, also from Tehillim. My spirit refers to the name Havaya that is actually, I don't think that's from Tehillim. My spirit refers to the name Havaya that is revealed in every Jew. This is through learning Torah. There's no strength other than Torah. This is through the learning of Torah by children. Meaning Hashem says it's not by might and it's not by power that we win wars. It is true that we need to make a vessel, we need to have a strong army, everything else, and an army does go to war. That is true, but that's not what wins the war. What wins the war is my spirit, meaning Hashem. Hashem wins the war for the Jews. So the most important thing in winning a war is to activate Hashem's presence among the Jewish people. And how is Hashem's presence activated amongst the Jewish people? Is through learning Torah, and especially through learning Torah, the Torah of children, because children's learning of Torah is very pure. And therefore, if we put these two ideas together, it says that babes and sucklings are what silences the enemies and avenger. And we know that it's through Hashem's presence that we win a war. And we know that through a child's learning of Torah, which is a pure learning, we activate Hashem's presence. Then we understand that we have the answer to our question. Why is it through babes and sucklings that we win a war? It's because the babes and sucklings activate Hashem's presence among us, and that's what wins the war. So that's why we say out of the mouths of babes, they silence the enemy and the avenger. This is sort of like an internal question in the mimer that's asked and answered right away, but establishing the importance of making sure that children are learning Torah. Okay? So now is the reiteration of the first question, right? We still don't have the answer to the first question, which is, how could it be that during the times of exile, when the Jews were on a low spiritual level, they affirmed what they had already begun, especially at the time of the giving of the Torah, the name of Havaya is shown within every Jew. If we're saying that, we're strong when the name of Hashem shines within us, and usually that's done through the learning of Torah of children, but it was also done at the giving of the Torah. Havaya's name shown within every Jew at that time for sure. So why, how could it be that in the times of Purim, there was a stronger reacceptance of Torah than in the times of the giving of the Torah? Okay, back to our original question. Section 3. The explanation to the main question. Your people are all righteous. They are the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, in which I take pride, right? That's a famous pasuk as well, describing the Jewish nation, which is going to be reiterated later at the end of the Ma'amar. But the Jews are all righteous by virtue of their souls and their conception in purity. How could it be? How could this be, especially in a time of exile, like when Haman wanted to kill them all, chas v'shalom, and the children responded with self-sacrifice by showing they had no fear of Haman and that they would continue to learn Torah? Again, it's elaborating on the question. How could it be that the children had this self-sacrifice, and the nation in general, who are all called righteous, had the self-sacrifice in the time of Purim? And this is basically the answer to the question. And really the rest of the Ma'amar elaborates on this answer, right? That is a pattern in most Ma'amar, that there's a big question at the beginning, it's answered, but then it's unpacked for the rest of the Ma'amar. So the answer, that's why the answer is in blue, bold, right? The answer is, how could this be? It's because the pasuk also says in Megillas Esther, there was a Jewish man, Mordechai, and in his generation, Mordechai served a function equivalent to Moshe in his generation. That's what the Medrash says. Mordechai b'dar k'Moshe b'dar. Mordechai was the same in his generation the way that Moshe was in his generation. And it was through Mordechai's influence that the Jews' souls shone forth openly. It was through Moshe's influence that the Jews' souls shone openly in the time of the giving of the Torah, and it was Mordechai's influence that the Jews' souls shone openly in the time of Purim. And because of that, they were able to reaccept what they had already begun, and it was even able to be at a deeper level. It was due to the influence of Mordechai. That's the answer to the question. How, why, all of that we don't know yet, but that is the answer to the question. To explain this idea in greater depth, how could the leader of the generation accomplish this with the Jews of the generation? We have to go back to an original pasuk that describes Moshe, because here we're saying that Mordechai is like Moshe. So what is it about Moshe that did this? Let's go to the source, right? Where's the first time that we see this idea? So this is the first time, is this pasuk in Chumash, and you, Moshe, shall command the children of Israel to bring you pure oil crushed for the light, to keep a constant light burning. That's the pasuk that tells us about Moshe's relationship with the Jewish people and his ability to bring out their souls and make them shine forth openly. That's the pasuk. So that the Friedrich Rebbe is saying, how do we understand what Mordechai did? By going back to understand how Moshe did it. And how do we understand how Moshe did it? We're going to look at the pasuk that tells us that Moshe did it. And we're going to have 5 questions on this pasuk. And the rest of the Ma'amar is basically going to give us the background information so that we can answer these 5 questions. Once we answer the 5 questions, we'll understand how it worked for Moshe, and then by extension, how it worked for Mordechai. So these are the 5 questions. And again, they're all in different colors because they're going to be, and the answers are going to be in their matching colors, right? So the first question is, and you, the pasuk says, and you, it's referring to Moshe, shall command the children of Israel. Basically, you see each of the questions underlined is the words of the pasuk, right? It's just I'm taking the word of the pasuk and quoting it into each of the 5 questions. Whatever's underlined in the question is the actual wording of the pasuk, right? So the pasuk is divided up. So and you, Moshe, shall command the children of Israel. That's the first section of the pasuk. This is not the regular way the Torah expresses this idea. Usually the Torah says, and God said to Moshe, saying, tell Bnei Yisrael, blah, 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 whatever he, right? So this is not the usual way, but here it says, and you, Moshe, shall command the children of Israel. This is a very unusual. Number 2, it says to bring you. Why are they bringing the oil to Moshe and not to Aaron? This oil is talking about the oil that was used to light the menorah, and Aaron was the one who lit the menorah. So why are they bringing the oil to Moshe? Bring the oil to Aaron. Question number 3, crushed. It had to be pure. Why does it say that why is this word crushed added? It doesn't seem to tell us anything. It's extra. The Torah doesn't use extra words. And it says crushed for the light. Why does it say for the light? If you're going to already say crushed to illuminate. What do you mean for the light? That doesn't also make sense. And number 5, to keep a constant light burning, that's actually not the instructions to Aaron. Aaron's instructions when to light the menorah were not to keep a constant light burning. It was to light the menorah, that it should last from evening till morning. That's the terminology that's used. He lit it in the morning, he lit it at night, and he lit it at night so that it would light until morning, not to keep a constant light burning. It's just not the same wording that it tells Aaron what he's actually supposed to do. So what also doesn't seem to fit. So basically, this is the pasuk that unlocks how Moshe activates the souls of the Jewish people to shine forth openly, but we have lots of questions on this pasuk, so we need a mimer to explain it. And then the previous Rebbe says, to answer these questions, it's necessary to explain their parallels in the service of Hashem. Once we have explained this pasuk and the levels of the service of Hashem, then we will understand how, to some degree, how Moshe activates the soul of the Jewish people, and then that will answer how Mordechai did it, and that will answer how it was possible for the Jews to serve Hashem and we accept the Torah in the time of exile. Okay? How are we doing, ladies? Okay. Section 4. So if you see in section 4, it already starts to answer these questions on one level, right? So those are in the same color as the questions. But again, the whole mimer is going to be giving much more depth to these answers as well. So this is like one level of an answer. So command, ata tetzave, that's the pasuk, ata, you shall command. Tetzave, command also means to connect. So actually it says, and you, Moshe, shall command the Jewish people. It means, and you, Moshe, shall connect to the Jewish people, right? That's one level of an answer to question 1. In every generation, there's a tzaddik who performs a similar function like Moshe, and Torah commands him to connect to the Jews. And you shall connect to the Jews, basically. It doesn't say Moshe's name. Every leader, you shall connect to the Jews. And when you do, they will bring you olive oil. Why does it say to bring you? They're going to bring this leader olive oil. What does that mean? By studying Torah mitzvos, they will augment the light at the level of Moshe. Meaning that whenever a Jew learns Torah, does mitzvos, and he's connected to the tzaddik, he brings this light to the tzaddik. He brings this oil to the tzaddik who's connected to the tzaddik, is given leadership because of the Jewish nation. So as the nation does what it needs to do, it also influences the tzaddik's ability to lead. And the result will be a constant, that's a one level of an answer to question 2. And then, and the result will be a constant light, which is the answer, one level to answer 5. In other words, the question for the light sort of gets subsumed within constant light burning, that the result of this tzaddik, of the leader of the generation, connecting to the Jews, it helps their souls to shine forth and them to do Torah mitzvahs. And when that happens, it also impacts the tzaddik. And the result is that there's a constant light burning amongst the Jewish people. That's an answer. That's a translation of this pasuk. Okay, beginning of the answer. However, we still have another 5 pages of just the review, right? So we're not done yet. It's going to go into a deeper level. More explanation. Moshe is called the faithful shepherd, since he nourishes and sustains the faith of the Jewish people, even to the point of self-sacrifice, right? The faithful shepherd, we said there's two ways of translating it. Faithful shepherd means that you could count on him, and also faithful shepherd is shepherd of faith, that he shepherds faith. That means he nourishes and sustains the faith of the Jewish people. And that even to the point of self-sacrifice for himself, and also that arouses self-sacrifice in the Jews. Faith needs to be nourished and sustained. It doesn't happen automatically. As it's written, trust in Hashem and nurture faith. It doesn't, faith is, even though faith is ingrained in every Jew's soul, it's in the hard drive of the soul, but it's not automatically nourished and sustained. It needs to be actively nourished and sustained, as it is written, trust in Hashem and nurture faith. Those are commands, right? You have to do something. As the Torah explains, faith is sustained and fed through your acts. So the way that we sustain and nourish our faith is by basically Torah mitzvos. We can't take it for granted. There's an extension of Moshe in each generation who does, it should probably be does, who does the same with each Jew. A Jew is called a believer, the son of believer. However, there still needs to be a Moshe in each generation that helps each Jew trust in Hashem and nurture their faith. That's what the job of the leader is. What is the faith that has to be nurtured and nourished, even though every Jew is called a believer, the son of believer, is that the simple faith is in Hashem, that he permeates all the worlds and transcends all the worlds, right? Mimali kol almin and soiviv kol almin, and that there's no place devoid of him. This is like in simple terms, this is the faith that needs to be nourished and sustained by the leader of the generation through his connection to every Jew. That we have to believe that Hashem fills all the worlds, he permeates all the worlds, he transcends all the worlds, and that there's no place devoid of him, meaning he's everything. That's it. That once you got that down pat, everything's fine after that. That's all. This is like, you could just put that on your refrigerator magnet. Simple faith in Hashem. He's Mamalik Kalam, he's Soiv Kalam, and Leisa Sar Pinui Mine. Okay, finished. We could, now we can go make lunch. Like, that's it. That's all we have to do. And the leader of the generation is the one who helps us do that. Okay? So now, of course, we need to define, what does it mean, fills all the worlds, transcends all the worlds. If that's the simple faith that we have to have, it's the faith that we're supposed to have, that we're supposed to nourish inside of ourselves with the help of this leader so that it shines forth openly. If that's what we have to do, then we have to define what is Mamali Kol Almin, what is Soiviv Kol Almin. If that, right? Because if we want to activate that level of faith in ourselves, we have to define our terms. Make sense? So the mimer has to go on now to define the terms. Right? Are you all with me here? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So section 5. True belief is manifested at the Soviv Kol Almin level. That's the transcending all the world level. Since the Memale level, which means the permeating level, can be understood, meaning faith sort of takes over where understanding stops to a certain extent. So what's happening here is we're going to define all these ideas, but the previous Rebbe even says, Memale Kol Almin level, this level of believing that Hashem fills all the worlds, is not that real actualization of our faith, because we could understand it. It makes a lot of sense. So that when something makes a lot of sense and we can grasp it, it's not really called full faith, because we can understand it, right? As we will see from the example below. Soiviv Kol Almin will be explained in section 9. Okay, so that's like the map of where we're going. Again, the true belief is at the Sovel Ka'aman level because Mimala level can be understood, as he's going to explain now, and the Sovel Ka'aman level will be explained in section 9. So we'll get to that, but we'll see. Okay, so now we're just going to define the Mimala Ka'aman level, which that is a light of Hashem that we have to believe in. But again, it's something that we can understand. So he's going to explain it with parables. Mimale. This is going to explain and describe the permeating light of Hashem. The body is called a small world, and the world is called a large body. They both have an animating life force, and we call that the Mimale level of Hashem's light, the Mimale Ka'aman level of Hashem's light. Okay? In the body, so first we're going to talk about how it manifests in the body, then we're going to talk about manifests in the world. So in the body, it's manifested in 3 ways, in the head, and the torso, and the legs. Remember, we talked about the different ways that that's basically the soul, the different ways that it manifests in the body. It's different in the head, and the torso, and the legs. So he says, head, torso, legs first, and then describes the legs first, then describes the torso, then describes the head, right? So the legs, what's the special quality of the legs? It has the least obvious godliness in it. However, it supports the head and it raises it up, meaning it's pretty, even though the legs are not so super sophisticated, it supports the head, and the height of the head is dependent on the height of the legs. Like if a person is sitting, their head goes down. If they're standing, their head goes up, right? The feet take the person to places that the head could not go on its own, obviously, right? So the head is dependent on the legs. And the ultimate source is more implanted here, although it's more obvious in the head, meaning the legs are what sort of enables a person to, like, it represents a person's course actions, right? Like they're being activated in the world. That's the purpose of creation, is, to engage and be activated in the world. So without legs, it would be hard to do that, because we don't have the mobility to do it. So the ultimate source is more obvious in the head, but it's actualized in the legs. More about the legs. Therefore, we need to reach out to these people, the feet, and motivate them to express this power. Meaning here, the previous Rebbe is saying it's not only that we have our own small body, but the Jewish people in general are called one body. So the same way we have individual legs, we also the Jewish nation has legs. They have the eyes of the nation, they have the legs of the nation. And the simple people, are the feet of the nation. They are the ones who support the head and raise it up. They're the ones who take the nation where it has to go, right? So we should reach out to these people and motivate them to express this power that they have. And for example, here are some ideas, right? The sages state a person who causes another to perform a mitzvah is greater than the person who actually performs the mitzvah. That refers to the supporters of Torah. So the previous Rebbe is saying here, even if somebody is not ahead, meaning they have a hard time learning Torah, but they can support Torah learners, that enables Torah learning to happen in the nation. So that's called like a leg supporting the head. It also applies to spiritual tzedakah as well, right? The first one applies to like physical tzedakah. The second one applies to spiritual tzedakah. Communal classes, the attendees at the communal classes help other people to come and, understand and be part of it. And mysterious nefesh is more openly revealed in the legs. The legs do what has to be done without thinking too much, because there's no brain in the legs. The brain is in the head, right? So it just sort of does what has to be done. It's like there's like the foot, we even call that in English the foot soldiers, right? There's the foot soldiers are actually carrying out the orders of the general. The general is the brains in the army. The foot soldier is the one who's carrying it out. The general can't carry out the plan by himself, is one person, right? The foot soldiers, who are many thousands, those are the people on the ground, literally fighting the war. So too, the Mesiras Nefesh, the spiritual war, is fought by the legs. It's maybe strategized by the head, but it's fought by the legs. So that's all the benefits of the legs. Back to the torso now, right? We did the legs, now go back to the torso. So godly life force is expressed by the legs, but it's not manifested so much by the legs. Back into the torso, there's a higher level in regards to the revealed light and life energy enclosed in the body, in the torso, right? It has the organs which the person's life depend on. That's what's in the torso. We know that we have to have the torso. I'm saying the heart is there, the stomach, the lungs are there. Like those are all of our organs are basically found in our torso. These organs are more refined than the legs. Our emotions are housed there. The heart, the power of movement in the torso is with the hands versus the feet. In other words, it's true that also locomotion is in the torso because of the arms, but even the locomotion of the arms, which are part of the torso, is a more refined movement. It reflects the inner power of movement, like art, it produces art, writing, right? The feet don't produce art and writing, generally speaking. So even though it's true, the arms are also needed for locomotion, it's the hands and the arms do much more refined movement than the legs and the feet. Plus all the organs that are necessary for a person to live, or except for the brain, which we'll get to when we get to the head, are housed in the torso. So the torso has a more revealed level of Hashem's light in it. And then that section 7, our emotions are on a higher plane than even the inner dimension of movement, meaning the torso has the inner dimension of movement, but the emotions themselves, which are contained within the heart, are even more refined than the more refined power of movement. And all of this is in the torso. So the torso has more revelation, even if it doesn't have as much expression of locomotion and carrying it out, right? Section 7. Sorry, our emotions. Okay, said that already. Back to the head. Right now we're going legs, torso, head. So the head, our most sophisticated faculties, sight, hearing, taste, and smell, are housed in the head. So there's faculties in the torso, digestion, breathing, right? The most sophisticated faculties, sight, hearing, taste, and smell, and then of course the intellect, are housed in the head. Those are our most refined. So as we go up the body, we're getting to more and more refined revelation, more and more refined faculties. Now, the previous Rebbe goes in, I put this whole section in parentheses, but he goes into this explanation that he's not belittling the heart. We need both the brain and the heart to function properly in all ways. An intellectual understanding alone will not influence a person's behavior. So we need the heart. We can't just rely on the brain. It's not enough to rely on the brain. The brain should understand and the heart should translate it into action, refining a person's comprehension. That's what should happen. Of understanding something intellectually alone is not going to affect the person in the full way that he needs to be influenced. So we can't say the brain is the most important. The heart is equally important. The brain conveys the idea to the heart, and so it is on a higher level as two. Meaning this is on a revealed level. So what is that point? The brain conveys ideas to the heart, but the brain is higher than the heart in that way. The brain is the one that has to understand something and then convey it to the heart, and then the heart has to actualize it and have the person feel it and connect to it. So you can't have the heart without the brain either, because what is the heart going to be all excited about if it doesn't have information coming to it from the brain about what to be excited about? So you can't, even though you can't live, meaning you need the heart to live, to actualize what the brain understands, you need the brain to give the information to the heart to actualize. You can't have the heart without the brain either. Everything we just said now about like the brain feeding the heart and so on, that's on a revealed level of mimale. However, there is a deeper truth, which is that the heart also contains a will of the heart, rusa de liba, which transcends the brain. And that is on a sovev level. Basically, that's why we need to have both, because on the level of revelation, the brain is above the heart. But on the concealed level, the heart is above the brain, or in the concealed elements of the heart, it is above the revealed elements of the brain. That's on a sovev level. The will of the heart has two levels. How do we, where do we get to this will of the heart, which is this internal level that's higher than the revealed levels of the brain? That is which brought about by meditation on Arin Sof in the brain to aroused in the heart. And that's like a more revealed level of the heart. And the will of the soul in its essence and core. That is housed in the concealed elements of the heart. Both represent the soul's life energy as it transcends the life energy enclosed in the body, and so they are on a Sovev level. So again, what we're saying basically is that the head is on top of the torso because that represents the idea that the head has to feed the heart. We're not belittling the heart. We need to have both to function properly. The head needs to feed the heart. The heart needs to like connect to it and translate it into action, influence the person. That's in the order of creation, head, heart, legs. That's in the revealed aspects of creation, the state of Hishtalshelus, the order of creation goes from up to down, high to low. At the same time, in the inner recesses of the heart is connected to something that's above the brain. The inner recesses of the heart is connected to something called Re'usa Daliba, which is twofold. There's an external and an internal to that level. One is meditation on Hashem. That's a feeling in the heart, not necessarily comprehension of the brain. And the other is the will of the soul and its essence and core, which is again beyond the intellect. These are things that are beyond, they're supra-rational. So the heart on a revealed level is sub-rational, but in its core, in its inner dimension, it's supra-rational. So the supra-rational level of the heart is above the head, whereas the emotional level of the heart, the revealed emotions are receiving from the head, which is why we need to have both. And here the Friedrich Rebbe adds this point of, head, heart, torso, head, heart, legs is mimale, but the concealed aspect of the heart, this Re'usa Daliba, which is above the revealed aspect of the intellect, that's a Sovev level, because again, Sovev is something that's beyond the ability of the vessel to contain. So this idea is beyond the ability of the vessel to contain, because the head is above the heart in terms of its lightened vessels. The part of the heart that's above the head is the part that's beyond being contained in a vessel, because the vessel of the heart is below the head. So here we're talking about the inner core of the heart, which is above the vessels of the heart and the head, and therefore it's Sovev. Okay, that was a little more complicated. How are we doing, ladies?
Rebbetzin, do you mind putting in the supra part that you just said in words when we go back and read it? That was helpful, the way you added that part about.
Well, my only hesitation, maybe I could do it in a editor's note. It's not in the mimer. I'm trying to, I could say
it was helpful.
Chaya's added explanation or something. I don't want to make it seem like it's in the mimer. It's just, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it just was hard to understand. So
yeah.
Sovev until you said that part, because it seemed mamala before that.
Okay.
To me.
I could try to how they have sometimes in a translation, they have editor's note.
Yeah. Maybe no one else had that problem though.
Oh no, go ahead, do it.
No, yeah, any explanation added would be great. I'm still processing it.
Yeah. Well, that's why I didn't send out this ahead of time. I mean, I didn't send it out last night with the email because I felt what's the point of somebody reading this now? It has to be a discussion, otherwise it could get very confusing.
Yeah.
So Rebbetzin, so it seems natural to think that the brain, before you said that, would be mamala. And how does it get to Sovev is what you just explained at the end. Do you mind right?
The brain, heart, legs is mimale. The inner dimension of the heart is above the brain.
Right. That's hard to understand until you add the editorializing.
Okay.
For me, anyway.
Okay, I'll make a little note to myself here.
Is there any part of the brain that's Sovev?
In other words, where's the source of the brain? What the inner source of the brain? Is that what you're asking?
Right.
Yeah. I never heard of it. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean anything specific because there's lots that I haven't heard of, but I never saw it anywhere explained that way. The understanding of the heart is considered to be higher than the understanding of the head. But the emotions, the external emotions of the heart are the receivers from the head. So I never heard of the, inner, everything basically is an inner and an outer, right? But yeah, I don't think it's exactly like that.
What about Chachma? With that flash.
Yeah.
That's from Sovev, isn't it? And
it receives from Sovev. That's the Koyach HaMaskil that it receives from Keser. Keser is Sovev.
Right.
It's a vessel to receive from Keser.
And but that goes into the brain.
Right. Chachma is the first point of contact where Sovev encloses itself into a vessel, into Mamale. Chachma is the beginning of the intellect. That, by definition, means that that's the foot of Keser that spans into creation, and the foot of Keser that spans into Ein Sof is on the other side. Okay.
Yeah, it's cooking.
Should I continue? People ready to continue? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So now this idea of these three levels of head, torso, legs in the person on the small world, now we also go to the remember we said that the body's like a small world and the world's like a large body. So now the previous Rebbe is going to explain how that works also in creation, the levels of creation. So in the world, right, which is the large body, right? Remember in the beginning we said this, okay? In the world, the light and life energy is also manifested in three ways: the world of Bria, the world of Yetzira, and the world of Asiya. These are the three. The world of Atzilus, which is higher than the world of Bria, is considered to be in a separate category. It's like, more God than world. So we're manifesting in these three ways. And then again, I'm putting in the parentheses, like what's he explaining about it? There are really infinite number of worlds and levels, but they can be categorized into these three general groups with the Mamali level of Hashem's light. In other words, it's a big jump. The Mamali level of Hashem's light in Bria is different than in Yetzirah and different than in Asiya. This is through self-contractions and self-veiling, and it is through the attribute of Malchus that the world is ultimately created, basically. And it manifests through Malchus, this light of Hashem, in two ways: in a nearby way and in a far way. Like a king who needs to be both exalted above his people and yet concerned about all the details of the country's affairs. So like a king has to be nearby and far, the attribute of Malchus relates to creation in a nearby and far way. So too in the spiritual realms, there's influence through metaphoric distance and metaphoric closeness. But basically, this influence of Hashem's light into the physical world also has three main contractions: Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. The same way that the soul has three main ways of filling the body: the head, the torso, and the legs. So since we can understand this idea of the permeating light of Hashem, because we can relate to the fact that our soul is more manifested in the head and then in the torso and the least in the legs, we can relate to that idea. And we can even relate a little bit to the idea of spiritual worlds and physical worlds, and Hashem being more manifested in the spiritual worlds and less in the physical world. Because we can relate to this concept, this idea of Mimalik La'am and level of Hashem's light does not require perfect faith. It can be understood at some level and even related to at some level. And therefore, when we talk about Moshe and Mordechai, right, the Moshe and his generation, Mordechai, his generation, activating the faith of the Jewish people, We're not really talking about activating the faith in Mimale, although that's true as well, but at like the core level, that's not really what we have to do, because we can learn all of this and sort of activate this level of understanding Hashem's light because of the fact that we can understand it a little bit from ourselves and from our world. Right? Remember the context that the previous Rebbe was talking about the Mamali level of Hashem's light. It's not just teaching us about the Mamali level of Hashem's light. It was in the context of saying we can understand it. See, we can understand it like this and like that. And so therefore, this is not the light that we're really talking about when we talk about the leader of the generation activating the faith of the Jewish people. What we're talking about, the leader of the generation activating the faith of the Jewish people, we're talking about the Soviet level. Everybody remember that? This is almost like a big parenthesis in the mimer, you know? Okay. So now, as promised in section 9, it's going to talk about what is the Soviet level of light have to do over here. So there's another level of Hashem's light, not just Mamad, there's also Soviet Kalalman. And this is the level that the Rebbe said above needs true faith, which needs the activation of the leader of the generation. Right? This is the editor's note. I should put the editor's note here. Okay. Okay, are we
Can I
fine?
ask a question?
What?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So basically, the minute you understand this for a split second light, it's no longer that light. It's the other one.
Sovev?
Yes. In other words, if there's any, you can't understand it, because once you understand it, it's the other kind, it's Mamali light. Because you can't comprehend it, or you won't comprehend it in pieces, and then it becomes your personal Mamali light.
Well, then it becomes that you are being nourished by your faith. That's the terminology in the Maimar. You are being fed your faith. That's what it's. So does it technically become Mimale? It doesn't really become Mimale. It just becomes that you're able to, at some level, grasp a hold of Sovev. Your vessel has been expanded. You have been nourished. Your faith is nourishing you.
Uh-huh.
I'm with Carolyn on this, although I'm not as funny in my delivery. The split second thing, I understand what she's saying. She's like, sometimes we get like a split second of maybe like really pure emunah, or as pure as we can do, or bitachon or something like that. And I get what she means. Like what we think is that split second is probably mamala, but maybe we got it from the leader, and maybe it hit us for a second and we felt it. But I see what she's saying, that then we bring it right into mamala, because that's all we really know how to do.
Is there, is
I don't-
Mamala, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
is Mamala an intellectual understanding which is lower than Sove, which is, we can't comprehend it, but we do it anyway, or we accept it anyway, and that's a higher level of faith?
So Mimala and Sovev refer to two levels of God's light. They don't refer to us. We don't do Mimala or Sovev. That's God's light is either Mimala or Sovev. We're talking about two different levels of Hashem's light. Mimala permeates a vessel, Sovev surrounds a vessel. So we can understand the idea of the level of Hashem's light of Mimala because, as Hil Parsha would always say, "Mibsari echse eloka," from my flesh I see God. What does it mean? That's a pasuk. But what does it mean on a mystical level? From my flesh I see God. It means that Hashem created me in such a way that when I understand myself, I'm a parable for God and creation. Because everything that Hashem does has His stamp on it, which means everything follows the same structure of creation, and we are a microcosm of creation. So when we understand ourselves properly, we become a parable for God's creation of the world and God's light and everything else. Like it says, we were created in His image. So we are not mamali or soivev. God is, these are two levels of God's light that either fill a vessel or encompass a vessel. The level of God's light that fills a vessel is a level that we can comprehend at some level, because we, here in this mimer, the previous show says, because we see in ourselves that our souls permeate us on these three levels, and we see in the creation of the world that there's different levels of Hashem's permeation of himself into creation. So we can sort of relate to this concept of the fulfilling light of Hashem, because we see it, we experience it, we interact with it. The level of Soivev Kalam and light of Hashem is a level that is beyond us to access exactly, which is what he's going to describe right now, what that level sort of what it sort of entails. We haven't really described what it entails yet, but it's a light of Hashem that transcends the world. It encompasses the world. It's larger than the world is. The world is contained in it, as opposed to it being contained by the vessel. So it's not right. So what I understood you to be saying, Carolyn, is that when we have a moment where we understand that idea a little bit, haven't we brought it into our vessel? We haven't changed the light. The light is Soive versus Mamale. That doesn't change. That's God's business. When we have a moment where we understand something of Soive, what we've done is we've contained Soive a little bit in our vessel of our brain. I thought that was your question, which that is accurate to some extent, which is but the way that we refer to that is that our faith is nourishing us. The way that food, when we eat food, it nourishes us. If you put food on a table and you look at it, or even if you know those balls, those like those activity centers for kids, and then you jump into balls, like and then the kids are like swimming in these balls. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So like pretend those balls are oranges, right? Like if you jump into a thing of oranges, you are surrounded by oranges, but like they're not nourishing you, because if you want to be nourished by oranges, you've got to eat one of them, right? So the surrounding light of Hashem, I mean, obviously it nourishes us. It's not, a parable is only a parable, right? Of course it nourishes us, because it's the whole world is being created by Hashem also through this light of Soiv Ka'amen, but not in a revealed way. It's so we have that level of the surrounding light of Hashem is something that is a larger than life, so to speak, almost, right, level of Hashem, which he's going to explain a little bit more and more eloquently than what I'm saying right now. But in section 9, that summary, right? So and what we are trying to do, so that's a natural, and that that's an overarching, the world is found in God type of situation. We don't notice it. Like, does a fish notice that they're in water? Do we notice that we're surrounded by air? We don't notice these things. We can't, it's like, it's automatic. It's just our existence is in that. We don't have the ability to like step out of what the place that we exist in, because there's no other place for us to go. That's everything. We can't step out of the structure. There's no other thing out of the structure. We can't step out of God. So we're always within God, but we don't experience it that way. We just experience it that we're going throughout our day-to-day life. So when we have a connection to that level of existence and that level of God's light, that's called our faith is being nourished. That faith, because we have a natural faith that is true, that we don't always access or relate to on a conscious level. When we do access it and relate to it on a conscious level, that's called we are being nourished by our faith. And that requires the assistance of the leader of the generation for us to get to that point where we get to be nourished by our faith. Now, also, we need to be nourished by that level. Sometimes we're not nourished by that level too, but the pristine level of faith that has to really be activated is this Soiv Ka'amen. The Rebbe is saying here, because Mamal Ka'amen we can sort of a little bit do for ourselves, a little bit. again, it's the most extreme thing. The tzaddik is helpful for every part of it, right? But at least it seems to me, based on this mimer, that that's what the previous Rebbe was saying, that really Mamali is, Seviv is what's really required, the help of a tzaddik here, because Mamali we can relate to a little bit on our own. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, to some degree.
Okay.
I guess it defined my question more to me, but I
Okay.
don't want to take up all the time.
Well, this is a big central point in the mimer. I don't think
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to everybody. But did that answer your question, Talia? You were sort of like tag teaming with Carol a little.
No,
Definitely, because you clarified where we were, like I misinterpreted her question. So, and also Mamala and Soviv is not ours, it's Hashem. So that helped
Right.
me a lot. Thank you. I don't feel like we're staying, I feel like we all need this. But well, I
Yeah.
do. And so
It was a great
it's helpful to
question.
everyone. But now that that's clarified, I just want to say one more thing, and then we're going to have to end class just to make everything a little more complicated. Our souls also have a Soviv and Mamale aspect to them. We don't call it Soviv and Mamale necessarily, because that's really, reserved for Hashem, but the soul has an encompassing and permeating aspect to it as well, just so that you know that piece. But we don't call it, so we call Alman and Mamali call Alman, surrounding the world and permeating the world. That is reserved for God alone. But the concept of a surrounding and permeating light of the soul, we have a surrounding and permeating light of the soul. It's just not, that term is only about God. So
oh,
Carolyn, that was a great question. That was a great question.
Thank
It really was. It really pulled things together.
I mean, I think my question basically was about, do we personally grow in faith and do we even know it's happening?
we do. The answer to that is yes. That was your
Thank
question? The answer is
Thank
yes.
you.
How's that
But
for
do
a
we know
simple
it's
answer?
happening and how?
Right. It's right. Okay. Well, it's, yeah. Anyhow, that's okay. So I'm happy to send everybody the summary. We could wait till next week when we finish going over it, or I could just send it. You could review in the between weeks. I guess we could review between weeks if you want to review between weeks.
Please send it. Please send it.
Yeah.
Please
Okay.
send
Here's Hashem.
Thank
All
you.
right.
thank
Well, hi,
you.
Simcha. Didn't see you come on. Okay. Have
Thank
a
you so
wonderful,
much.
wonderful week, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
Thank you, Chaya.
Everyone
Okay.
have a
Thank
good
you.
week, everyone. Have a good week.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Take care.